Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The arena was a bowl carved from bone and stone, scorched by the merciless glare of dual stellar bodies that dominated the sky. Red dust, sharp as crushed glass, billowed with every movement, settling on skin and infiltrating lungs with each labored breath. The fine particles clung to sweat-slicked bodies, creating a second skin of crimson that marked all who dared enter this sacred battleground. Above the arena rim, strange vegetation clung to the bone structure, twisted, spiny growths that pulsed with an internal bioluminescence. Occasionally, when the hot winds shifted, they would release clouds of microscopic spores that drifted like deadly constellations across the fighting grounds. In the center of this ancient coliseum stood Cain, his muscular frame coated in the blood-colored powder that had become as familiar to him as his own shadow. His eyes, once bright with purpose, now held the hollow emptiness of a man who had seen too much and lost even more. All units, maintain formation. Bombing run in 60 seconds. The voice crackled through his memory, Captain Drayson's final order before Cain had turned his ship against his own fleet. The flash of explosions, the screams over the comm channel, the faces of the civilians he'd saved by betraying everything he once stood for. Cain blinked the memory away, focusing on the arena around him. The present, the fight, the survival. A year. A whole year had passed since his corporate fighter, the Falcon, had crashed into this god-forsaken world. The memory of that day still burned in his mind. Alarms screaming, systems failing, the violent shudder as the ship's hull breached the atmosphere. The ship spun wildly, console lights flashing red. The proximity alarm wailed. His hands, steady in 100 combat missions, fought for control as the atmospheric entry tore at the hull. Mayday! Mayday! Falcon requesting immediate assistance. The transmission cut off as the comms died. Below, the alien landscape rushed up to meet him. What should have been a routine transport mission had ended in flames and twisted metal. For a year, he had survived, transforming from a skilled pilot into something more primal, a gladiator. He was now the undefeated champion of the Circle of the Chosen, a brutal ritual where the warrior women of the indigenous people fought for the right to choose the strongest male as a mate. The crowd's murmurs rippled through the arena like waves on a poisoned sea. They watched him with a mixture of fear, respect, and thinly veiled contempt. He was an outsider, an alien to their ways, yet he had mastered their sacred combat with unsettling ease. 12 fights, 12 victories, 12 opportunities to claim a mate that he had rejected, taking only what he needed to survive instead. His opponent, a warrior from the Stone Clan, rushed at him with a guttural roar that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than her throat. Her four-armed body moved with frightening speed, muscles rippling beneath iridescent skin that shimmered despite the layer of dust. A serrated blade gleamed in each of her four hands, the metal catching the harsh light as she charged. Cain didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his breathing measured, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He waited. He saw not rage, but only tactical errors, a stance too wide, excessive aggression, a predictable attack pattern that betrayed her inexperience with an opponent of his caliber. "Take your defeat with honor," he whispered, words lost in the howling of the spectators. A sudden gust of wind swept across the arena, carrying with it a cloud of tiny crimson particles from the pulsing growths above. The Qatarian warrior's eyes widened in alarm. She abruptly twisted away from her attack trajectory, sacrificing her offensive position to avoid the spores drifting between them. Cain, unaware of the danger, saw only an opening. He stepped aside at the last possible moment, letting her lunge carry her past him. As he did, one of the glowing spores drifted inches from his face in slow motion. On the stands, the Qatarians gasped collectively, their attention shifting from the combat to the deadly particle that nearly touched the oblivious outsider. The warrior, having evaded the spore, momentarily lost her balance. Cain delivered a single, precise strike with the hilt of his improvised spear, a piece of the Falcon's hull that he had shaped into a weapon, into the nerve cluster at the base of her neck. For a fraction of a second as his weapon connected, the four-armed warrior's face blurred before his eyes. Instead, he saw Lieutenant Eva Ross, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream as her fighter exploded into a fireball. The comm channel had stayed open just long enough for him to hear her final breath. Kane blinked and reality snapped back into focus. The warrior collapsed into the dust, paralyzed but alive, her eyes still burning with defiance even as her body betrayed her. The fight was over in seconds. The crowd fell silent, but not from disappointment at the brevity of the spectacle. They were processing how close the off-worlder had come to death without even knowing it. The clan chieftain, a massive figure seated on a throne made from the bones of a desert leviathan, rose to his full height. His voice boomed across the arena as he proclaimed Kane's victory. By tradition, the defeated warrior now belonged to him, a mate won through combat, as was their way since time immemorial. The outsider claims victory again, the chieftain announced, his deep voice resonating through the arena. The warrior Shalkus is now his to claim. But Kane shook his head, as he had done 12 times before. He walked past the fallen warrior without a glance, ignoring the hatred burning in her eyes. He approached the chieftain's throne and silently pointed to his payment, piled at its base. 2 fuel cells, their blue energy pulsing visibly through translucent casings, in a sealed container of purified water more precious than gold on this arid world. It was enough to keep the life support systems of his crashed ship running for another week. Another week of survival. Another week of hope that the distress beacon would finally be answered. "You dishonor our traditions, Skyman," the chieftain said quietly for Kane's ears alone. "How many more will you defeat before you accept your place among us?" "I have no place here," Kane replied, his voice rough from disuse. "This is not my world." He took his winnings and, to the contemptuous whispers of the crowd, left the arena. As he passed the fallen warrior, she glared at him with pure hatred. In her eyes, he saw the same accusation that haunted his nightmares. The faces of those who had died because of his choices, both made and unmade. He was not a husband or a prize to be won and claimed. He was a mercenary in a marriage market, and his only goal was to await rescue, or, failing that, to gather enough resources to fix the Falcon and get off this rock forever. The walk back to his crashed ship was long and arduous. The vessel lay half buried in the shifting sands at the edge of the settlement, a monument to his failure as a pilot and his persistence as a survivor. As Kane approached, he saw the damage with fresh eyes, as he did every day. The scorched hull plating, the shattered viewport, the torn stabilizer fins. The Falcon would never fly again without significant repairs that required parts and tools he didn't have. Inside the ship, the emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly blue glow. Kane carefully stored the water container in his dwindling supply cache and installed the fuel cells in the ship's auxiliary power system. The life support indicators shifted from critical red to cautionary yellow. One more week of breathable air and temperature regulation. One more week before he would have to fight again. He collapsed onto his makeshift bed, the pilot's chair that he had removed and modified, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring another day of scavenging, of repairs, of desperate hope. But for now, he allowed himself the luxury of exhaustion. Sleep came quickly, but was interrupted by dreams of home, of blue skies and green fields, of the family he had left behind when he had chosen to become a corporate pilot. And beneath those pleasant images lurked darker memories. The orders he had refused to follow, the civilians he had saved, the fleet he had betrayed. He was a hero to some, a traitor to others, and now he was neither. Just a survivor on a hostile world, fighting for one more day. A harsh screech jolted him awake. The emergency lights flickered as Kane rolled from his makeshift bed, hand automatically reaching for the blade beneath his pillow. His eyes darted to the salvage security monitor showing the perimeter of his crashed ship. Something massive was moving around the hull. Kane adjusted the feed. The night vision sensors revealed a creature the size of a small transport vehicle, its segmented exoskeleton gleaming wetly in the moonlight. Multiple pincer-like appendages scraped against the Falcon's metal skin, testing for weaknesses. Its tail, tipped with what appeared to be a crystalline stinger, arched over its back, probing the seams of the airlock. "Not tonight," Kane muttered, activating the ship's emergency defense system. A jury-rigged array of electrical nodes that sent a powerful current through the outer hull. The creature convulsed as the shock hit it, then retreated into the darkness, its screeching fading into the night. Kane didn't return to his bed. Instead, he sat in the pilot's chair, staring at the security feeds. He'd patched the hull breaches as best he could, but the metal was wearing thin in places. The native fauna was growing bolder, attracted to the ship's heat signature. It was only a matter of time before something broke through. His sanctuary was becoming his tomb. The next day, the air in the arena was electric with tension. Kane felt it the moment he walked in, the hairs on the back of his neck standing at attention. Something was different. The usually boisterous crowd sat in a tense, expectant silence that pressed against his eardrums like the pressure change before a storm. Seated on the ornate throne next to the chieftain was an outsider, a massive warrior in heavy black armor, adorned with trophies of battle, his face disfigured by ritual scars that formed a pattern of concentric circles from forehead to chin. Krell, someone whispered nearby, and the name rippled through the crowd like a current of fear. But it wasn't Krell who commanded Kane's attention. Beside the warlord sat a withered figure draped in elaborate robes of iridescent fabric. Her face was ancient, lined with countless years, and her eyes were milky white. Blind, yet somehow seeming to see everything. A headdress of twisted metal and bone framed her features, marking her as someone of tremendous importance. "The matron," the same voice whispered with even greater reverence and fear. Kane took his position in the center of the arena, waiting for his opponent. The red dust swirled around his feet, stirred by a hot wind that carried the scent of anticipation. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless, shifting in their seats, murmuring questions to one another. A commotion at the side of the arena drew everyone's attention. The warrior woman from yesterday's match, the one Kane had defeated, was being dragged across the sand by Krell's guards. Still weakened from her injuries, she stumbled and fell at the foot of Krell's viewing box. The warlord grinned, revealing filed teeth, then casually tossed a bone with scraps of meat still clinging to it. It landed in the dust before her. "A prize for the defeated," Krell called out, his voice like grinding stones. His entourage laughed sycophantically. The crowd of Qatarians went silent, their collective silence a mixture of fear and disgust. The warrior woman did not move to take the insulting offering, and Kane saw one of Krell's guards move to strike her. "Pick it up, animal," the guard hissed, raising his whip. The warrior glared defiantly. "I am Shalkus of the Stone Clan. I am no one's animal." Krell's laughter boomed across the arena. He made a casual gesture with his hand. The guard's whip came down with vicious force, opening a gash across the woman's back. She did not cry out, but her body convulsed with pain. "You are what I say you are," Krell said, leaning forward. "Today you're an animal. Tomorrow perhaps you'll be nothing at all." Before the guard could strike again, another figure stepped onto the sand. Zarya, the chieftain's daughter. Her skin was the color of deep twilight, and her silver hair was woven into an intricate braid that fell to her waist, adorned with the polished fangs of predators she had killed with her bare hands. 4 muscular arms extended from her torso, each one a perfect instrument of destruction. She moved with a grace that made the other warriors seem clumsy by comparison, each step calculated and precise. A cold fire burned in her golden eyes as she approached Kane. She did not challenge one of the men of her clan, as tradition dictated. She challenged Kane, the outsider, the undefeated champion. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. The chieftain rose from his throne, his face a mask of contained fury. But before he could speak, the ancient matron raised one withered hand. The arena fell immediately silent. The blind priestess turned her milky gaze toward Zarya, though how she knew precisely where the young warrior stood was a mystery. Her voice when she spoke was surprisingly strong and clear, carrying to every corner of the arena without effort. "The law is the law," she intoned. "Let the circle decide." The chieftain sank back into his seat, his authority visibly diminished by the matron's intervention. Krell's face twisted in rage, but even he dared not challenge the ancient priestess's ruling. The chieftain's voice boomed across the arena as he announced the terms of the combat, and Kane felt an icy hand clench his heart. Zarya was fighting for her freedom. Her father had promised her hand to Krell, the brutal warlord who now sat in the guest box, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. The union was meant to seal a fragile peace between their clans, a political alliance forged through the body of a woman who had no say in her fate. By ancient law, if she defeated the arena's champion, she was freed from all vows not of her own making. If she lost, she was bound to become the victor's mate, a gamble that would either liberate her or chain her to a different fate. The trap had been sprung, and Kane was caught in its jaws. If he won, he would save her from Krell but doom her to a union with him, an outsider she clearly despised. If he lost, he would lose his status, his resources, his only means of survival on this harsh world. And if he refused the fight altogether, she would be handed over to Krell immediately, with no chance of escape. He looked at Zarya across the arena. She was staring directly at him, and in her eyes he saw not hatred, but a silent plea that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. This fight was her only chance at freedom, and he, Kane, was her only obstacle on the path to that freedom. "Let the combat begin," the chieftain declared, and the crowd roared its approval. Zarya moved like liquid silver, her forearms weaving patterns in the air as she circled Kane. He raised his spear defensively, studying her movements, searching for weaknesses in her guard. Unlike his previous opponents, she did not rush in blindly. She was patient, calculating, a predator who knew the value of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Why me?" Kane asked quietly as they circled each other. "Why not challenge someone you could defeat easily?" Her golden eyes narrowed. "Because you are the only one worth defeating," she replied, her voice like velvet over steel. She struck suddenly, two blades flashing toward his throat while the other two aimed for his knees. Kane parried with his spear, the metal singing as it deflected her attacks. The force of the impact sent vibrations up his arms, numbing his fingers momentarily. She was stronger than she appeared, each of her forearms capable of delivering killing blows. The fight continued, a deadly dance of attack and counterattack. Kane landed a glancing blow on her shoulder, drawing first blood. The crowd gasped. No one had ever wounded the chieftain's daughter in combat before. Zarya's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in newfound respect. She fought with renewed vigor, driving Kane back toward the arena wall. "You fight well, for an outsider," she said between strikes. "You fight well for someone who wants to lose," he replied, catching the flicker of shock in her eyes. Before she could respond, a horn sounded, signaling the end of the first round. By tradition, the combatants would resume the next day, giving them time to rest and prepare for the final confrontation. Kane retreated to his ship, his mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. Zarya returned to her father's compound where Krell waited with barely contained rage. That night she came to him. Kane lived in what was left of his ship. The broken hull of the Falcon had become his home and workshop, a sanctuary in a world that viewed him as an intruder. He was sitting in the light of an emergency lamp, checking the primitive perimeter alarms he'd constructed around his crash site, when movement registered on his makeshift security monitor, a salvaged sensor array from the Falcon's navigation system. "I know you're there," he said without looking up, adjusting the sensitivity on the scanner. "My traps may be primitive, but they work." She stepped into the blue-tinged light, her silhouette appearing in the gash of the airlock. She wore no armor, only a simple tunic of coarse fabric that did little to conceal the powerful body beneath. Her silver hair hung loose, free from its warrior's braid. "Yet I'm still standing here," she replied, stepping further into his domain, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. She moved like a predator, assessing threats, cataloging weaknesses. "Your defenses have gaps." "Only the ones I want," Kane said, finally turning to face her. His hand hovered near the weapon at his side. Her eyes narrowed. She moved deeper into the ship, circling the cramped space like a predator. The air between them crackled with tension. She reached for a panel on the wall, and Kane moved with lightning speed, catching her wrist. "Don't touch that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, her face inches from his. "You fear me," she said, not a question but an observation. "Respect and fear are different things," Kane replied, still holding her wrist. "I respect what you're capable of." She twisted suddenly, breaking his grip with surprising strength. In the same fluid motion, she drew a concealed blade from her tunic and pressed it against his ribs. Kane responded instinctively, his hand closing around her throat, his other hand drawing his own blade to her heart. They stood frozen in this deadly embrace, neither willing to back down. "We could kill each other right now," Kane said softly. "Would that solve anything?" After a long moment, Zarya lowered her blade. Kane released her throat. They stepped apart, each studying the other with newfound wariness. She moved deeper into the ship, running her fingers along the control panels, the damaged hull plating. She approached his sleeping area, picking up his old flight jacket, examining the insignia that had once marked his rank and unit. "You want me to lose?" Kane said, watching her carefully, tensing as she explored his private space. "You have to lose," she said, her voice quiet but firm, turning to face him. She now stood beside a section of the ship where diagrams of the Falcon's specs were still visible on a cracked display. "Tomorrow in the arena. You have to let me win." Kane finally looked up, his hands automatically checking the edge of his blade. "My honor is not for sale," he replied evenly. She laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the confined space of the ship's interior. "The honor of a mercenary who sells his skills for fuel? Don't make me laugh, Skyman." She moved closer to the ship's damaged navigation console, studying the star charts still visible on a fractured screen. "You kill for politics," she said, studying a star chart on his damaged console. "You slaughter innocents for resources. You call this honor?" "I never killed innocents," Kane replied, his voice like gravel. "That's why I'm here. That's why I ran." She turned to him, skepticism clear in her golden eyes. "The honorable deserter? A contradiction." "The honorable slave?" he countered. "Is that not also a contradiction?" Her nostrils flared. "I am no slave. Yet you're being traded like property. For peace." He spat the last word. "A peace bought with flesh is no peace at all." "And what would you know of our ways?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You who crash-landed here a year ago? You know nothing of our struggles, our history." "I know enough," Kane interrupted, rising to his feet. "I know when someone is being used. I've seen it before. Followed orders before. Until I couldn't anymore." She studied him, her anger giving way to curiosity. "What happened? What orders could you not follow?" Kane turned away, the memories too raw. "They wanted me to bomb a civilian settlement, thousands of innocents, to destroy one enemy outpost. And you refused?" "I did more than refuse. I turned my weapons on my own fleet, gave the civilians time to evacuate." His voice dropped to a whisper. "My squadron mates died because of my choice." A heavy silence filled the broken ship. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its edge. "The matron was my mother's teacher," she said quietly. "She taught her to fight, to lead. Now she sanctions my sale to Krell for the good of the clan. She says it's my duty." Kane turned back to her. "The blind woman? The priestess?" Zarya nodded. "The most powerful woman in our society. Her word is law." A bitter smile crossed her face. "And she has decreed that my body is the price of peace." "Then we have something in common," Kane said. "We both face impossible choices." Their conversation was like another duel, words replacing blades but cutting just as deeply. She pressed, he parried. But through the anger and desperation, something else began to grow between them. Understanding. "Why do you fight?" she asked, sinking down to sit across from him, her forearms wrapping around her knees. "You never take a mate. You only take resources. What are you fighting for?" Kane was silent for a long moment, considering how much to reveal. Then slowly he began to speak. He told her about the war he had fled, about the command to bomb a civilian colony to destroy a single enemy depot, about how he had disobeyed, turning his fighter against his own fleet's ships to give the people time to evacuate, about how he became a deserter and a traitor, but kept what he considered his true honor. "I couldn't follow that order," he said, his voice barely audible. "I couldn't be responsible for thousands of innocent deaths. So I became responsible for the deaths of my fellow pilots instead. My own people." She listened in silence, and her expression changed from contempt to something more complex. Then she told him her story. About her mother, a great warrior killed in a nomad raid. About her father who had changed from a chieftain into a politician, willing to trade his own daughter for a fragile peace that would likely not outlast the season. About being seen not as a person, but as an asset to be bartered away. "Krell has 3 mates already," she said, disgust evident in her voice. "All won in combat. All bear the scars of his affection. I would rather die in the arena than live as his possession." They were fugitives, each from their own prison. He from a past he couldn't escape. She from a future she refused to accept. "If I lose, Krell will kill you," he finally said, breaking the contemplative silence that had fallen between them. He won't tolerate a rival, even a defeated one. If you win, I will kill you myself before I allow myself to be called your mate, she answered, her hand instinctively moving to a concealed blade at her waist. Then it seems we're both in a difficult position, Cain concluded, setting aside his spear. No matter who wins tomorrow, someone loses everything. She left as quietly as she had come, slipping into the darkness outside the ship. They remained enemies by circumstance, but there was no longer hatred between them. Only the tragic understanding that tomorrow, one of them would have to destroy the other's dream of freedom. Cain slept fitfully that night, his dreams a chaotic mixture of past battles and imagined futures. In some, he saw himself returning home, vindicated and forgiven. In others, he remained stranded on this world forever, fighting in the arena until age or injury finally claimed him. And in a few, disturbing in their vividness, he saw Zarya, sometimes as his enemy, sometimes as something else entirely. Morning came too quickly. Cain prepared himself methodically, checking his weapons, stretching his muscles, focusing his mind. By the time he entered the arena, he was ready, his body a weapon, his mind clear of doubt. The arena roared with the voices of thousands. The spectators had doubled overnight as the word spread of the unprecedented challenge. The harsh light beat down from above, turning the red dust to glowing embers that seemed to burn with every step. Zarya entered from the opposite side, her armor gleaming, her silver hair once again braided for battle. 4 blades, one in each hand, caught the light as she approached the center of the arena. Her eyes found Cain's across the distance, and a silent message passed between them, a recognition of the impossible situation they shared. The chieftain raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. Krell leaned forward in his seat, his scarred face twisted in anticipation. The hand fell. The fight began. It was not a crude brawl like many of the arena battles. It was a dance of death and life, of skill and strength, of 2 souls caught in the same trap but fighting for different escapes. His calculated tactics, honed in dozens of battles and years of military training, against her natural grace and fury, born of this harsh world and a lifetime of preparation for combat. Every lunge from him was precise and deadly, a testament to his training. Every strike from her was an embodiment of power and speed, a display of her birthright as a warrior. They moved like 2 predators studying one another, searching for a weakness to exploit, a moment of vulnerability, but there was no weakness in either of them. The arena fell silent, watching a duel the likes of which had not been seen for generations. Even the chieftain leaned forward on his throne, captivated by the display of martial prowess. Time seemed to stretch and compress. Minutes felt like hours as they fought, their bodies glistening with sweat, their breathing becoming labored. Neither gained a clear advantage. For every blow Cain landed, Zarya answered with one of her own. For every attack she launched, he had a defense prepared. But Cain was more experienced. He began to read her, to anticipate her attacks based on subtle shifts in her stance and the tension in her muscles. He saw how she shifted her weight before a lunge, how the muscles in her shoulders tensed before a strike. He began to lead the dance, forcing her onto the defensive, making her retreat step by step across the arena floor. He saw the moments when he could have ended the fight. There, she was open after a powerful spin, a strike to the back of her knee, and she would fall. There, her hand with the blade dipped too low for an instant, a thrust, and she would be disarmed. But each time he hesitated, his mind replaying their conversation from the night before. If you win, I will kill you myself before I allow myself to be called your mate. He finally seized an opening. His spear flashed in a complex maneuver that sent one of her blades spinning away into the dust. She stumbled backward, momentarily thrown off balance. Cain pressed his advantage, sweeping her legs from under her with a precise strike. She fell hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Before she could recover, he was standing over her, his spear at her throat. The arena fell deathly silent. Victory, absolute and undeniable. Cain looked down at Zarya, her chest heaving with exertion, her eyes wide with the realization of defeat. In those golden irises, he saw not fear of death, but terror of a life in a cage. Krell's cage. He saw a reflection of himself on that night he chose flight over obeying an immoral order, the choice between submission and freedom. His hand had hovered over the weapons control panel. the civilian colony below, home to thousands. The order to destroy it still ringing in his ears. "Sir, there are families down there," he had said. "Acceptable losses," came the cold reply. In that moment, he'd made his choice. Across the arena, Krell was already rising from his seat, a triumphant smile splitting his scarred face as he prepared to congratulate his new son-in-law, the man who had won the woman Krell could not have. The matron sat motionless, her blind eyes revealing nothing of her thoughts. The arena watched, thousands holding their breath for the champion to claim his prize. And then, with deliberate slowness, Kane lowered his spear. He took a step back, and another. He looked around the arena at the thousands of spectators, at the system that had trapped both him and Zarya in this moment. Then, with purpose and precision, he drove his spear into the exact center of the arena, embedding it deep in the red sand. The weapon stood there quivering slightly, a rejection not just of victory, but of the entire system that demanded it, a flag planted in defiance of their traditions. Stunned silence fell over the arena as Kane stepped away from his weapon and from his victory. He stood unarmed and vulnerable before Zarya. Zarya stared at him in disbelief, frozen in place. The crowd erupted in confused shouts. Krell's face contorted in rage. Kane stood defenseless, arms at his sides, making no move to protect himself or retrieve his weapon. His eyes never left Zarya's. This was no accident, no slip. This was a choice. Perhaps the first truly free choice he had made since crashing on this world. Slowly, her hands trembling slightly, Zarya rose to her feet. She retrieved her fallen blade, then approached Kane. The silence returned as she stood before him, her weapon poised. Everyone in the arena understood what they were witnessing. Not a fight, but a moment of profound transformation. She placed the blade against his throat, drawing a thin line of crimson. Kane froze. He slowly raised his hands in the universal gesture of surrender. He had lost. The absolute silence erupted into a deafening roar from the shocked crowd. Krell leaped to his feet in his box, bellowing with fury, his hand already on his weapon. The chieftain watched the arena, his expression unreadable, his eyes moving from his daughter to the defeated champion and back again. Zarya stood over Kane, breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling with exertion. The blade in her hand trembled slightly, the only outward sign of the emotions raging within her. She was free from Krell, free from the political marriage that would have been her prison. But by the unbreakable law of her people, she was now bound to him, the man who lay at her feet. She looked down at Kane, and in her golden eyes there was no longer hatred, only confusion, shock, and the seed of respect that had just been planted. "The outsider is defeated," the chieftain announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "My daughter stands victorious." Krell stormed from his box, pushing through the crowd toward the arena floor. "This is trickery," he roared, his voice like the grinding of stones. "The outsider threw the fight. I demand satisfaction." The chieftain raised a hand, silencing the warlord. "The combat is concluded according to our laws. My daughter has won her freedom from your claim, Krell. The peace between our clans will have to be secured by other means." Krell's face contorted with rage. "This is not the end, chieftain," he snarled. "Your daughter has made a mockery of our traditions. There will be a reckoning." He stormed from the arena, his entourage hurrying to keep pace with his furious strides. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement over the unprecedented outcome and speculation about what would happen next. Zarya extended a hand to Kane, helping him to his feet. "You lost," she said quietly, for his ears alone. "I made a choice," he replied, equally softly. "Just as you did when you challenged me." Her eyes searched his face, looking for deception or ulterior motive, but finding only the same understanding that had grown between them the night before. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I find another way to survive," Kane said, looking at the arena that had been his lifeline for a year. "And you enjoy your freedom." She nodded slowly, then turned to follow her father as he left the arena. Kane watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of loss and satisfaction. He had sacrificed his position, his resources, his only means of survival, but he had kept something more important. The same honor he had clung to when he had disobeyed that fatal order back in a war that seemed a lifetime away. The days that followed were difficult. Without the resources from arena combat, Kane was forced to venture deeper into the hostile wilderness surrounding the settlement, scavenging for anything that might keep the Falcon's systems running. The distress beacon continued its silent plea into the void, but with each passing day, the hope of rescue dimmed. He was returning from one such expedition, his pack laden with salvaged components from an ancient wreck he had discovered, when he saw the riders approaching his ship. 4 warriors on massive beasts that resembled a cross between lizards and horses, their scaled bodies rippling with muscle beneath the harsh light. Kane dropped to the ground, concealing himself behind a rocky outcropping. He recognized Krell at the head of the group, his black armor unmistakable even at a distance. The warlord dismounted and approached the Falcon, examining the ship with calculated interest. He gestured to his warriors, who began to unload equipment from their mounts, tools for dismantling, for salvage. Krell had come to take the Falcon. Kane's hand tightened on his spear. He was outnumbered, outmatched, but the ship was all he had left, his only hope of ever leaving this world, his only shelter in this hostile environment. He prepared to rise, to confront the intruders, knowing it would likely mean his death. A hand clamped over his mouth from behind. Kane reacted instantly, twisting to face his attacker, but stopped when he found himself looking into Zaria's golden eyes. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling for silence, then beckoned for him to follow her. They retreated to a safe distance, where 2 more of her warriors waited with mounted beasts. Krell seeks revenge, she whispered urgently. He believes you cost him his prize, me. He means to take your ship as compensation, and your life if you try to stop him. That ship is my only way home, Kane said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. It's a broken hull that will never fly again, she countered. My father has sent me to bring you to the settlement. You are under his protection now. Why would he protect me? Zarya's expression softened slightly. Because I asked him to. And because he respects what you did in the arena, choosing honor over victory. Kane looked back at his ship, where Krell's warriors were already beginning to dismantle the exterior plating. Everything he had salvaged over the past year, every repair he had made, every hope of eventual rescue, all being torn apart by greedy hands. There's nothing worth saving there, Zarya said, following his gaze. The real parts you need, the ones that might actually repair your ship, are in my father's possession. He has been collecting them since before your arrival, from other wrecks in the deep desert. Kane turned to her, surprise evident on his face. Why would he do that? Because he believes that someday someone will come looking for you. And when they do, he wants to ensure they find a friend, not an enemy. She mounted her beast and extended a hand to him. Come, there's much to discuss. A week later, in the chieftain's throne room, a ceremony unlike any other was taking place. Kane's belongings, what little Krell had left intact, were returned to him, along with something unexpected, the fully repaired and refueled Falcon, its systems restored using parts the chieftain had collected over years of trading with other settlements. You have shown an honor we have not seen even among our own warriors, the chieftain said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You sacrificed your victory and your status for the freedom of another. We grant you your freedom in return. Fly wherever you wish. Kane nodded, accepting the gift with humility and gratitude. The distress beacon had finally been answered the day before. A corporate rescue vessel was en route, due to arrive within days. After a year of exile, he would finally return to the stars, to civilization, to a life beyond endless combat in a dusty arena. But as he turned to leave, Zarya blocked his path. She stood before him, no longer in battle armor, but in the ceremonial robes of her position as the chieftain's daughter. Her silver hair flowed freely down her back, adorned with jewels rather than battle trophies. Father, she said, her voice echoing through the hall. He lost the battle to give me a choice. Now my choice is to stay with the one who values freedom more than victory. A murmur ran through the assembled clan members. This was unprecedented, a champion choosing her defeated opponent, rather than the other way around. Before she could say more, the massive doors to the throne room crashed open. Krell strode in, flanked by a dozen heavily armed warriors. His face was contorted with rage. This mockery has gone on long enough, he snarled, drawing his weapon, a massive serrated blade that hummed with some unknown energy. The outsider conspired to rob me of my rightful prize. I demand satisfaction. The chieftain rose from his throne. This is a sacred ceremony, Krell. You dare violate our customs with weapons drawn? Your customs? Krell laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You abandoned custom when you allowed this farce of a combat to stand. He pointed his blade at Kane, the outsider through the fight. By rights, she belongs to me. I belong to no one, Zarya said, stepping forward to stand between Kane and Krell. I fought and won my freedom, as is my right. Krell's face darkened. Then I challenge you both. Right here. Right now. His warriors spread out, surrounding the throne room's occupants. Kane moved to Zarya's side, unarmed but resolute. It seems, he said quietly, that neither of us will be leaving just yet. A soft tap echoed through the suddenly silent hall. All eyes turned to the entrance, where the matron stood, her ceremonial staff striking the stone floor with each measured step she took. The ancient priestess moved with surprising grace for one so old, her blind eyes somehow finding a path through the crowd that parted before her. Krell of the Desert Clans, she said, her voice carrying power that belied her frail appearance. You speak of rights and customs, yet you bring weapons to a ceremony of peace. She turned to Kane, her golden eyes holding his gaze without wavering. The law says I am bound to be your mate. But I ask you, Kane, man from the crashed ship, who had never lost, will you accept me not by law, but by your own will? The throne room fell silent, all eyes shifting from Zarya to Kane to Krell, whose warriors now had weapons drawn, awaiting their leader's command. Kane looked at her, at the woman who had fought for her freedom as fiercely as he had fought for his honor, at the warrior who had challenged an undefeated champion rather than accept a fate not of her choosing, at the person who had seen beyond his alien appearance to the soul beneath. He smiled, for the first time in a long time, sincerely. I had never lost, he said, his voice quiet but heard by all, until I met you. And everyone in the hall understood that this was not a confession of defeat. It was the beginning of something entirely new, a union of equals, forged not in the fire of combat, but in the deeper understanding of two souls who had recognized themselves in each other. Krell's face contorted with fury. Enough, he roared, raising his blade. No more words, no more ceremonies. This ends now. He charged forward, his massive blade arcing toward Kane. But before the blow could land, Zarya stepped between them, her hand going to a small ornate dagger at her waist, an ancient weapon that seemed more ceremonial than practical. As she began to draw it, the matron's voice cut through the chaos. Remember, child, the blind priestess called out, her voice carrying surprising strength. The blade of choice has no power of its own. It merely reflects the strength of the choice already made in your heart. If there is even a shadow of doubt within you, it will crumble to dust. All eyes turned to Zarya. This was more than a test of combat. It was a test of conviction. She looked at Kane, who stood unarmed but ready to face Krell despite the certainty of defeat. In that moment, her last doubts vanished. You are right, matron, she replied, her voice steady and clear. The power was never in the blade. It was always within me. I was simply afraid to embrace it. As she spoke these words, the dagger began to glow, the light intensifying until it nearly blinded those watching. When she fully drew it, the blade pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. No longer just an artifact, but an extension of her will. The dagger met Krell's massive sword with a sound like thunder. Against all odds, the small blade held, its light intensifying until it nearly blinded those watching. This is the blade of choice, Zarya said, her voice ringing with authority. Passed down through my mother's line for 20 generations, to be used only when defending one's true heart's choice. It can be wielded only by a daughter who seeks to protect her freely chosen mate. The blade's glow intensified, confirming the truth of her words and the sincerity of her choice. Our oldest law, Krell, even you cannot stand against it. Krell stared at the glowing dagger, then at Zarya's resolute face. For a moment, the outcome hung in balance. Then, with a roar of frustration, he lowered his weapon. This is not over, he growled, backing away. There will be a reckoning. Perhaps, the chieftain said, rising from his throne, but not today. Today we honor choice and freedom, the very foundations of our people's laws. When Krell and his warriors had gone, a heavy silence fell over the throne room. The matron approached Zarya, her blind eyes fixed on the still glowing blade in the young warrior's hand. The blade of choice has not shone like this for 3 generations, the ancient priestess said. Not since your grandmother faced down the sand serpent migration? The chieftain looked at Kane with newfound respect. You could return to the stars, some sky man. Your ship is repaired. Your beacon answered. Why stay here in our dust? Kane looked at Zuria, then back at the chieftain. For the first time since his arrival on this world, his face held not the tension of survival, but the calm certainty of purpose. All my life, I've been a pilot, he said, his voice steady and clear. A pilot's job isn't just to fly, it's to chart a course. For years, I flew using other people's maps, following other people's orders. Here, he paused, looking around at the assembled Qatarians. For the first time, I feel I can help chart a new course, not in the sky, but on the ground. The chieftain nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. From fugitive to pathfinder. An interesting journey, Skyman. The most important journeys, Kane replied, rarely follow expected paths. A week later, Kane stood before the Falcon. The ship had been fully repaired, its hull patched, its systems restored, its engines primed. After countless repairs and improvisations, the vessel was finally flight-worthy again. The red dust of Qatar swirled around its landing struts, carried by the perpetual hot wind that swept across the settlement. Kane ran his hand along the smooth metal of the hull, feeling the familiar contours beneath his fingers. This ship had been his prison for a year. Now it represented something else entirely. A choice. He climbed the access ladder and opened an external panel near the cockpit. Inside, a small blue light pulsed steadily. The emergency beacon that had been transmitting his distress signal continuously since the crash. The same beacon that had consumed so much of his hard-won power. The reason he had fought in the arena week after week, scraping together enough resources to keep it running. His hand hovered over the switch. This tiny light was his last connection to his old life, to the stars, to the civilization he had left behind. One part of him still yearned for that familiarity, for the comfort of known skies. Behind him, he heard footsteps approaching. He didn't need to turn to know it was Zarya. The stars are waiting, Sky Man, she said quietly. She stood a few paces away, making no move to approach further, giving him the space to make his choice freely, the same freedom he had given her. Kane looked from the beacon to the settlement spread out before him. In the distance, he could see the arena where he had fought so many battles, where he had finally lost one that mattered. Beyond that, the chieftain's compound, where new alliances were being forged. And all around, the harsh, beautiful world that had tried to kill him every day for a year. A world where for the first time since he disobeyed that fatal order, he had found purpose beyond mere survival. With a decisive motion, he flipped the switch. The blue light faded and died. The silence that followed seemed to hang in the air between them. He closed the panel and turned to face Zarya. You're abandoning the stars for a world of dust? She asked, surprise evident in her golden eyes. Kane descended the ladder and crossed the distance between them. His face held something new. Serenity, certainty, peace. I'm not abandoning anything, he said, taking her hand in his. I'm finally choosing which sky to fly in. They stood together as the twin suns of Qatar began their descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the red landscape. Behind them, the Falcon stood silent, no longer a means of escape, but a monument to the journey that had brought them to this moment. In the distance, the luminescent spores drifted on the wind, creating rivers of light against the darkening sky. The massive scorpion creatures prowled the far dunes, their crystal stingers glinting in the fading light. This dangerous, beautiful world, now their world. For the first time since his ship had crashed onto the red sands of this planet, Kane looked to the future with hope instead of desperation. He had lost a battle, but in doing so, he had won something far more valuable. He had found his true course.